All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Hannah Knight, and this is Hugh. We're here for another podcast. We are super excited about this podcast today, and we're coming down to the last final moments. Hugh, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. The usual dev life. I haven't slept in like 4 days.
Tell me about it, right?
But
I know it's coming real down to it, so I can only imagine you and the dev team kind of working hard on that. How's that going so far?
yeah, it's going really well. Everybody's just cranking out code and just putting the pieces together, and just getting everything ready. We're actually at the stage where we're starting to deploy. So we've got our API up. We're starting to deploy our contracts to the blockchain. The front end is going to be up, so it's coming together. It's a little tight, but you know what? It's coming really good. It looks great, and so it's one of those things that can't wait to get into the hands of the users and just get some feedback at this point.
Perfect. That is what I like to hear. Again, guys, I thank you guys for tuning into another podcast. As we said, my name is Hanif and this is Hugh. Today we have a great podcast. We have a special guest here today on our podcast. We've been doing this now for, I think it's episode 8 or 9 right now. We're super excited. We brought on one of the team members last week. We had a great time with him there. But again, guys, I thank you guys for tuning in. And if you guys are just tuning in for the first time, we are obviously the co-founders of the TAP project. And the project is essentially a blockchain project that essentially allows gamers to convert their in-game currency virtual items and coins into cryptocurrencies, and specifically the TAP coin. So again, this is not any sort of investment advice, legal advice, or anything like that. This is just myself and Hugh and our special guests talking about blockchain gaming, crypto, the state of the universe, and everything that surrounds it. So today, as I said, we do have a great show set. We have a special guest, someone who's been working behind the scenes with the project and specifically related to patents. So today we have Kurt from Perpetual Patent. Kurt, how you doing?
Fine, Hannah. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, perfect. Anytime. I know you've been working with us, definitely behind the scenes. So it's, myself and Hugh, obviously it's a pleasure to have you here and speaking a little bit about patents and kind of blockchain patents and how that surrounds itself. So we're super excited about that.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I think you guys are really creative guys, and I'm really enjoying working with you.
Awesome, perfect. So I'll just leave the floor to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Anything that surrounds getting into the patent business or blockchain or gaming or anything that interests you around that.
Yeah, so I'm a patent attorney at this point. I was once an engineer and coder myself, but when I could no longer code, they told me I had to stop and become a patent attorney. And so I work a lot in computer science, databases, and most recently my interest has been in blockchain. So I've been doing some research in that and a lot of patenting in this area. It's a growing area, still very small, but I think it's quite an exciting time to be looking into patenting in blockchain.
Right, perfect. And you're with, is it Perpetual Motions or?
So my consulting firm is Perpetual Motion Patents, and we're sort of specialized in this area. We don't go too broad, not too big.
Right. That's awesome to hear. I know, we did work together in terms of finding the patents. And for those that, do not know, that we do have patent pending on the, obviously, the techniques and the mechanisms surrounding the TAP coins and the conversion mechanisms around that. And for those who wanted detailed into that, we did release an article on our Medium page. You can check it out, Medium and TAP_coin to look at that. But Kurt, you mentioned kind of you moved into the blockchain space and patents. What kind of pushed you into that and having the interest there?
I guess this is just a lot of white space here. In the patent world, we look at usually just so many tens of thousands of patents, which means ridiculous amount of prior art and competitors going up against. Video games I was looking at has like 25,000 patents, so it's just that whole area is trampled over. Whereas blockchain, not so much. I know there's a lot of hype around blockchain, but surprisingly, not everyone is savvy enough to jump onto the blockchain patenting wagon.
That's interesting. So there's 25,000 gaming patents, but do we have any sort of collective numbers as of kind of blockchain patents? If you were to say, maybe even just a wild guess, maybe.
Well, we know how many have been. There's about 800 that have been published, and it's growing at a quite exponential rate, about 200% a year. So we think that there's another 500 that haven't been published yet. So we won't even know for 18 months if anyone sort of jumped onto this. But at a guess, it's just over 1,000 blockchain patents. So yeah, it's very small by comparison.
Right, and that's crazy. There's so many more, obviously, patents and the use of blockchain. I'd assume just kind of, especially last year with the summer that we had last year, I'd assume kind of, 18 months from that time, the summer of 2017, that you'd see a lot more. So maybe next year, you probably, would that be right? You'd see more patents and kind of the ideas or people jumping on to patenting their blockchain projects, or obviously that would come with projects that would be successful or unfortunately fail or unfortunately not hit their targets. I guess there would be some concerns or things that are around that, right?
Well, that's right. I mean, we should be expecting seeing a few more published. I would worry about the several thousand white papers. If they haven't filed a patent, it's sort of too late for them now. Most of those are over a year old. So in Canada, the US, that's the end of the grace period. So basically, those people they're now operating in sort of the public space, which is a fine decision to make. It's a lot of decision that most startup companies make, is to not file patents initially. That was the way of Facebook and LinkedIn and Snap until they get caught out.
And why is that, you think?
Well, a lot of these founders, when they found, they're 20 years old, and they're a bit confused about patents. They're maybe a bit against them in the software world. They're not quite sure if this is causing more problem than good. So a lot of people just don't file them. They just go for broke for growth, and then they get sued when they get big, and they end up having to buy thousands of patents off the older firms like Yahoo and Microsoft and Nortel, if anybody remembers Nortel.
Oh wow, that's going way back.
So that brings back a lot of memories. So I got a question.
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, are we starting to notice, like, even now with those patents that are being filed, are they, is it following the same patterns? Are they the larger guys that are filing those patents?
Yes, exactly. That's what's happened is, even though I think a lot of the creative and really new applications and new technologies coming out are all, obviously, some universities, there's some private inventors, your platform, your Ethereum and EOS. They are not patenting, but the ones that are joining late, like IBM, Microsoft, they already have the majority of the patents now. Surprisingly, MasterCard, Visa, and NASDAQ, Bank of America, these sort of older financial-based companies, which are sort of not the blockchain, they're the centralized version, they are going to this as well, and they all have now 50 patents each. So they're aware of the need to file patents, and they're getting there first, and that could be a problem in the future when you end up with almost all the patents in IBM's hand.
Wow, that's a very interesting point to make, because is that a case of them playing smarter instead of harder, or what are they? That's very interesting.
I guess I see what you, is it. I guess it's just there's like a big divide. Is it the generations? Like, we've got the larger companies, and then we've got the startups, and it's like different mentality. So that's probably, I would think that's probably the case. The startups are more like go and grow, like you said, and the larger companies are like, slow and steady and more methodical and strategic in their decisions, I guess, right?
Yes, but also the companies I'm talking about have very renowned patent filing offices. IBM is the world's greatest filer. They file about 5,000 patents a year, and so
Wow.
they're no stranger to this. And so basically, they're a machine. Any idea that comes through their company gets patented. It just happens. It's not even. It doesn't need budgeting or second decisions. Whereas a startup company would think twice: do I want to spend my money on this or not? Will I succeed or not? Whereas IBM knows it will succeed. They'll be doing something with Hyperledger. They don't know what, but they're able to displace people who get there too late. If you show up in a few years and you want to, compete with IBM, you also have to compete with their 100 patents.
Wow. That is pretty. That's pretty interesting stuff.
That's very interesting. At just that point alone, right? Obviously, Hugh and I, we've always talked about a transparency into the market, and we always are encouraging, do your research, understand blockchain, and we encourage the growth of blockchain and growth and advancements of blockchain gaming. So we're not in this to say, one person needs a monopoly, but at the same time, it's almost like if you're not playing the game, you're going to be losing out in the long run, because as you're describing, these major companies are soaking up all these blockchain ideas and technologies. And yes, they can, some might argue, oh, it's just a patent, they can't own the actual technology, we'll move to this place and that place. But at the end of the day, yeah, if you do want your business or your idea or your token or whatever it might be to be successful, then that's something you're really losing out, if I'd say so.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I was a bit surprised to see, the 1,600 cryptocurrencies that are out there now. And I sort of expected to see, similar number of patents, and there was far less. But more surprisingly, almost none of the cryptocurrencies have a patent behind them. I know of a couple that do. So, I mean, it could be worrying for the people in that marketplace or the investors who want to get on board with this, but then they could run into problems in the future. I don't know what would happen, but you could imagine a situation where they just couldn't continue with their platform. I hope that wouldn't be the case, but it may be a bit naive to just launch all these currencies with no sort of strategy behind it.
Yeah, no sort of backing or anything like that. And then it's the funny part is, a lot of these companies that are, getting into these patent ideas, they're obviously staying out on the outside and kind of watching in. And, they might even say on some points, oh, we're not, we don't favor cryptocurrencies or anything like that. But then again, I guess your patent office is the truth, because then if you say, oh, they're filing, 15,000 patents or 500 patents, but they're one point putting out saying that they don't support this idea, then that's kind of on the other hand, right?
Yeah, I think a really interesting point in this space would be Craig Wright. I don't know what the conspiracy theories on this podcast are about Craig Wright. So when he may or may not have started Bitcoin 10 years ago, he filed no patents.
Oh yes.
Gave the world a great platform. And I think maybe some people now know he has been squirreled away working with a holding company. I think it's in the Bahamas, and it's a company called N-Chain. And now he has, I think, about 50 patents. So he's come back, and he's trying to make a name for himself and obviously get his technology out there. And it's basically where he was writing white papers, he's now writing a patent a month.
Oh, wow. That is very interesting stuff. And you know what? What's interesting, and you touched on a good point a little bit too. So I remember when we were doing the pitch events, a lot of not even a lot, but it comes up quite a bit. Are you guys patent pending, or do you have a patent? So it's one of those things where if those that are looking to back a startup or back a project for the long run, they're thinking about not just tomorrow or a year from now. They're thinking, 3, 5, 6 years. Is this startup going to be around, and is there going to be enough for them to hold their own in the big world, right?
Yeah.
It might even come down to a little bit of oversight as well. Obviously, when you're running we'll call it a regular business, so to speak, for being outside of blockchain or crypto. Those are some things and ideas that you obviously go for almost immediately. You want to get your idea patented, you want to get your product protected in a way that can allow your product to be successful or your company. But it's almost like, just with kind of what's been happening, it's almost like it's been an oversight to say, what is that state? Is it going to actually be, worldwide accepted blockchain technology? Because if it is, then obviously those that have patents, and if it's being regulated in that way, then those that have patents are protected, and they're going to win. At the end of the day, they're going to be on edge. But it's like people are saying, oh, is this actually going to be widely accepted? Is it going to be regulated? Oh, it might not be, so I'm not going to protect it in the way that traditional businesses would, which I think would be the oversight that, as Kurt might have talked about there.
Yeah, I think perhaps everyone, because thinks this is maybe going to be all open source, and because it's all distributed, basically the whole technology is free to the world, and it just lives in the ether, no pun intended, and therefore no one will come after them. I mean, that might be, I said, oversight, but naive. There are going to be hundreds of there are dozens of companies, the bigger companies. They're going to have hundreds of these patents, and they may covering what you do, or as any of your listeners want to file create tokens, you may not infringing theirs. It's hard to know, and they may not come after you. IBM famously does a lot of royalty work. They license out most of their patents, so they don't choose to go the aggressive route. Right.
It's more of as we mentioned as well, we talked a little bit earlier, it's more of that kind of that open source kind of dialogue. Let's get in a little bit in terms of some blockchain patents, and obviously the TAP project is surrounded by blockchain, and we are currently in that blockchain gaming space and in the blockchain patent space. But let's get a little bit around surrounding that. Do we see the same type of things surrounding gaming patents and surrounding kind of blockchain gaming? Anything that you know of around there?
So surprisingly, I thought gaming was coming up a lot, but I had a patent analyst firm called Graby I use out of India, and they're a great firm at sort of getting more into the details. And we looked at these hundreds of patents that talk about encryption and video games, and we thought there were lots of them, and it turns out we had to exclude almost all of them. There were two false positives. One was video games and blockchain were almost always being used to describe mining Bitcoin using your video console. So there were 100 patents we had to disclose just for ways of, So people basically had said, here's a new way of mining, or here's a new way of running a virtual platform. Oh, and also you could use your PS4. And so they show up. If you read other reports, you'll hear that there are hundreds of video game blockchain patents, but actually these are all the false positives. And the other ones were actual video game publishers, but their main interest was just that you could also use Bitcoin in their game. So it wasn't. I think there's an article you tweeted about and this was basically saying that you could live without the Bitcoin and the blockchain in these games. It just was another feature. You could also buy things with Bitcoin. So those are the false positives. So it ends up only being about a handful of patents that are really adding any technology to video games and blockchain.
That's interesting that you mentioned something like that in terms of the false positives that you're actually getting back. And as developers and kind of leading the TAP project, we always encourage those to be creative in the ways that they're advancing the technology, and not just rewrap something in terms of old ideas. Bring in some new flair, be creative. Blockchain is almost like the sky's the limit with things like this, where you're able to kind of do what you want. And it's very super interesting that you're talking about, people not really changing the way that they're looking at blockchain or changing the way that they're trying to advance it, but rather using old systems and trying to create new ideas off these old systems. Because a PS4 on a PC, you can run a PC using a PS4 emulator, or you can run it vice versa. But it's funny that you're mentioning that people are actually just trying to figure out ways to mine it, but not actually different ways and how that surrounds it. And with that being said, let's talk about Microsoft and Sony. What are you seeing in terms of with them? Because you did mention kind of people using the PS4 in terms of mining or mining Bitcoin or anything like that. What are these the big guys have to say about kind of blockchain and crypto in regards to these issues, or in regards to any sort of patents that they're starting or looking at or anything? Is there any sort of information that we're getting from there?
Yeah, I was hoping to find out through the patent back end, and it certainly hasn't published if they are working on it, anything clever. And I guess I've also been disappointed by the bigger players who are filing here. They're not really adding what I can really see as really great, innovative techniques here. They just sort of, as I said, this is a bit of a land grab right now for any of your listeners looking to an opportunity here. There are not a lot of patents in this area, so. This is really basically a chance to sort of say any application, any sort of new technique, and also figure out a way of adding to blockchain. And I don't think Microsoft and IBM have done that just yet, at least not in their patents.
So there's still lots of room in the area. It's sort of like the gold rush, right? You've got all this gold out there, and those that are first to it will get it, and those that kind of come along like, oh, I'll try it now, will end up with nothing. Because it's surprising to hear that even in the gaming space there's so much opportunities to kind of find even small niche areas that nobody's really exploring it. Like I wonder, like, compared to like how many just regular gaming patents are out there, do you happen to know what those numbers sort of look like?
For regular gaming patents?
Yeah, like just non-blockchain gaming patents?
Well, that was 25,000 I was saying.
Oh,
earlier.
okay, 20. Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
So there's a lot of things going. I mean, because video games have been on for a long time, they're not just, I mean, there's obviously the ways of drawing pixels and ways of running games. There's obviously console improvements. So it's quite broad. So I'm sort of looking to see things like people using consoles for wallets, or new ways using smart transactions. For holding game tokens, actual game assets, I guess.
Well, you guys heard it here. Kurt just kind of threw out an idea. So if anybody just reach out to us after, and we'll connect you, because you just threw out a gem right there.
Well, so when people like talk about, they invent the idea of smart contracts, you see hundreds of patents and follow on. Well, you could use a smart contract for this, you could use it for that, but they're not really adding much once they realize smart contracts are clever.
That's hilarious. Once you realize smart contracts are clever, that's too funny. And let's move on to something in regards to, I know we discussed kind of off audio about that, in terms of the idea about patents, whether it's a closed space, open source space. We're seeing things evolve around there. But what is your kind of take on it? I know some people believe that once you patent things, you're closing it, where others, the argument is saying, hey, no, once you're actually patenting an idea, you're actually providing an open source with the ability to say, with some recognition around that. What is your kind of take and your belief surrounding that issue or that discussion?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm very pro patent. As a researcher working, a lot of times this is the only way to really protect your investment. But in terms of the bads of patent, you don't have to enforce your patents, and you don't have to be a bad player. So a patent is only a right to stop people doing it, but it doesn't mean you have to. And for example, you decide to don't enforce it, or you can have it as an open license. So some companies like IBM, basically, they make a public statement and they'll actually register this for the patent office. They'll say, you can use this patent, that patent, this other patent for a fixed royalty. So basically, it's sort of saying, here, we'll teach the world how to use these technologies. And we've already said you can use them. And we, in IBM's case, they will often have a royalty set to them. But I think, as you know, there are some companies that don't even ever plan to enforce the patents. There's no royalty.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you bring up a really good point because, I know there are some out in the space that if you mention that, oh, we have a patent, you're automatically the bad guy, right? Like, oh, you just patented, so you're evil. You're doing why? But I think you bring up a really good point that you're protecting yourself and you don't have to enforce it. You can still carry on. You're just making sure that your idea, your mechanism, your concept, it continues to stay with you, and that 5-10 years down the road, you're not going to get sideswiped by a patent troll that happened to see that you haven't patented and then come knocking at your door and say, hey, pay up. You didn't patent it. Too bad. So sad. Give me my money.
Right.
And it's kind of one of those things, and you did touch on it, is you don't have to, be a bad patent player, but the understanding is that some people are there to be bad patent players. There are people that obviously are filing patents, daily when they're just, trying to be patent trolls, so to speak. But that's a very interesting point, is when you are patenting your project, it is a lot of times about defending yourself, defending your project, looking for longevity of your project. And the best way to succeed is not being knocked off by a bigger player or infringing on someone else's rights or anything like that. And we kind of saw it with Tesla when they first patented their idea, and then they kind of went out and said, okay, this is all open source. Our battery technology is all open source. We don't want to hide this.
Yeah, I know for us, one of the things that we said is, the best offense is a great defense, right? So if we can protect our butts while we're moving forward and pushing forward, then we're doing something good. So I know that's one of the things we thought about when we were like, okay, well, should we patent this idea? What are the goods and the bads? And when we weighed it, there was far more goods than there were bad. So
you mentioned Tesla, and I was going to ask you, who do you think has the most patents in the electric car space and batteries?
I feel.
I want to say GM.
I feel like that's almost like a trick question, almost.
Come on, bite.
I say GM. I would say GM. Go GM.
Okay, I'm gonna bite and say Tesla.
And of course, they said they have a lot of open patents, so they're not going to enforce them. And I sort of, I really appreciate what he's done there. But the interesting thing is, this is maybe it's a bit of a patent conspiracy, but the companies with the most electric car patents and battery patents are not electric car companies. They're the old gas car companies. So what we're going to see here, and this is a conspiracy theory, is that in 10 years' time, when Ford and Peugeot are out of business, their last dying breath will be to sue Tesla for $40 billion for infringing all the electric car patents they've been quietly amassing. And that was sort of the dying breath of, well, I guess it's not quite dead yet, but Yahoo, when they they owned the patent for the Google AdWords. When no one was using them as a search engine, but they did have a lot of search patents. So
very interesting.
It could be the case that
that is very interesting.
Exactly. So this, at the very least, could be a way of just sort of cross-licensing it. You can work with people and say that we're not going to enforce them, but we will if we have to. If our back's against the wall and someone comes after us, we're going to countersue. And so the nice thing to do, the civil thing to do, we agree not to sue each other. But we thought of this move ahead of time.
It's almost like a defensive mechanism.
It's super interesting that it's not that it's the gas company. It's the opposite side, right? So is it? Do you think it's more of a strategical move? Like, we know the way the market's going, but we're just making sure that we're going to be around. Like you said, with our dying breath, we're going to take that one last swipe and go out smiling, type of deal.
Yeah. Well, as I said, the number one filer in blockchain is like MasterCard and Bank of America. These are centralized schemes. They're not decentralized schemes. So one thought is that they're just there to close up the uses of transactions, decentralized transactions. But the less cynical thought is that actually maybe Visa and MasterCard become decentralized. But it's just an interesting thing to look at is why are they filing so many? Why are they in this space at all?
That is a very interesting thing to look at. It's kind of the idea of, whether it's new technologies and new startups that are, being gung ho about getting their ideas out there, but not, securing it with patents. Whereas the older, traditional businesses, as we talked about earlier, are kind of doing the same things. Are they kind of almost ensuring that they shut down the market, as you mentioned? Is this something, a technique or a strategy that they're using to ensure that we are controlling our competition? Or are we kind of ensuring that, hey, we're not going to be blindsided by something that's going to run us over because we're making so much or we're making millions at this time? But, I'm not mentioning any companies that do this or, something like that. But it's definitely an idea or a situation that might arise when we think about the tap coin or anything that's what reasons why we protected it, right?
You know what? It seems like there's more conspiracies in the patent industry than there is in the blockchain industry. I've learned so much. I'm starting to question a lot of things now.
Well, the funny thing is, it is as a matter of law, you have to disclose yourself as the inventor. And so for all the people who say they aren't in this space or whatever, or they are in the space, you can sort of find out from the public records. I mean, the patent database is really nothing more than a public record of what you are doing. But as I said, there's a legal requirement that you disclose certain things. So you actually get to find out, you get to build all these conspiracy theories just based on what people say they're doing in public and actually they're doing in private.
Ooh, super interesting. That's where you're going to find me tonight, just scrolling and taking a look. Oh, so that's what they're doing.
That's too funny, but it is true, right? You'll be able to disprove a lot of these projects that are saying they're launching tokens to the moon and bringing them back with a little bit of moon dust or something like that. You'll be able to disprove and say, hey, are they actually putting anything out there publicly? And you'll be able to provide enough information and research, which is what we always encourage for any users or audience. Do your research on blockchain and try to advance it in your own way. Let's get on to something that you did mention earlier as well. I'll just read a quick little snippet here. US is the top preferred market when it comes to protection of innovation related to using blockchain in gaming. But in terms of gaming revenue in the billions, on the second hand, we take a look at China. The Chinese market, it stands on top of the revenue charts as businesses. However, there's not significant amount of patent protection in China. Let's get on to just maybe an open discussion about why you feel that's happening or what's actually going on there or why is the case there.
Yeah, I think there's two things happening here. One is everyone's favorite market for filing a patent is the US, just the size and the rewards there. And obviously there's a lot of innovation happening in the US and they are quite sophisticated there. They will file patents first. But what I was filing through my analyst, Graby, we found that actually there were dozens of filers who are all Chinese and Chinese universities. And the distinction here is that they're all gambling patent, but gambling blockchain. And I think that's why we're looking at it as being a very large market, even larger than the US, maybe double the size of the US. So I think the financial market for gambling, the online gambling servers are all either located in China or they're owned by Chinese companies. And there's a lot of revenue there. And a lot of these companies are therefore following now up with blockchain gambling patents, with I think IGT being the biggest filer.
Very interesting. Interesting. So why do you think gambling is sort of become like the biggest filing there?
I think it's just a natural fit for blockchain. I mean, one of the things a blockchain fits is the trust issue. And the whole idea that you don't have to trust the person on the other side, so long as you trust the distributed ledger and the distribution of miners throughout the world. And so if you trust that, then there's no reason you couldn't go on and gamble online, believing at least that the other side isn't ripping you off. And I suppose up to now, there has been always this thought that, well, what's to stop them from handing me the wrong cards or the wrong spin of the roulette wheel? And so I think a lot of people said, well, this is a natural fit. We should put all of this stuff on blockchain. every bet should be a smart contract, so no one's ripping anybody off.
Very interesting.
Whereas I think people tend to trust Microsoft and Nintendo to, I'm sure some people have lost certain tournaments because they were sure someone was out to get them, but for the most part, people trust their centralized gaming platforms. There isn't that same feeling.
It's pretty interesting because when I'm gaming, I've never thought like, I wonder if they're throttling me to give the other guy the advantage. But I'm gonna start to do that now.
Well, it was interesting as well. You bring that up. I believe it was last year. Overwatch, Blizzard, the Overwatch game, which is a kind of a first-person team organized shooter, let's say. They had to release their information on their loot box systems because of the fact that it was believed that after a certain amount of play, you'd receive X amount of items or anything in your loot box, where it wasn't the case. You'd receive 70, even though you're playing longer hours, your chances of getting more items in a loot box were actually lower. And they actually had to put out all their information and their percentages and the results of that, and it turned out they were actually lack of better word, throttling the system and actually lowering people's ability to receive higher items in loot boxes. And so now actually they've released to say exact percentages, to say every 5 loot boxes you get 70%, and it will always be 70%, whereas before it could have been 60 or it could have been 80, but now that information is out there. So it's interesting, and I do believe that that push was started by the Chinese market, to say, hey, what's actually going on with these loot boxes? And although they were just virtual items and games, people really wanted to know, am I actually getting a fair shake at it?
Some of those games which are the darker games, perhaps, that sort of naturally align up with the darker, maybe dark web sort of drug dealing and what's the game I'm thinking of?
Like Mafia Wars or something, like in terms of
I mean, maybe that's a natural fit for Bitcoin when you don't trust anybody there, so maybe that's a natural fit. And you can maybe buy stuff only using Bitcoin and anonymous addresses.
Totally. It's kind of I think I've seen a Mafia Wars game that they've started to try and do off of Ethereum as well. I haven't played it or anything like that, but I definitely feel like I've seen that. Well, definitely love to have you on here, Kurt. And for anyone who is tuning in at the very end, we do have Kurt from Perpetual Motions Patents talking about patents today. Just before we end off, Kurt, is there anything that you kind of would like to discuss in terms of patents? Anything that surrounds the area? Anything in regards to that?
Yeah, but it's a very misunderstood area. And I would just really encourage any startup company that's going to launch a project, just before you go to investors and start tweeting things, do talk to a patent agent. They'll usually give you a half hour for free, or do your research online. There's a lot of good reasons to protect yourself and protect your investors. It just makes you more attractive. So this is why I only work with startup companies, is I just think they've got so much to lose and so much to gain. And that's why I'm here.
Awesome.
And thanks for having me, guys.
That is some great advice there, Hugh, what you were saying there.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, that's another gem that Kurt's is sort of throwing out there for the startups, and a lot of the blockchain space is startup space too, right? So, for listeners listening, or anybody, any projects that are listening to podcasts, take his advice. We definitely did, and it's one of the things that we are super happy with, and I definitely thank you, Kurt, for coming on. I've learned so much in this podcast. Sometimes I just kind of sat back in my chair and I was just listening, and I was like, oh, what? Really? So I do want to thank you, for coming on and just educating us and providing some good gems and providing some good conspiracy theory stuff to add, because I'm a big conspiracy theory guy. So this has been a stellar discussion.
Oh, well, I'm glad to educate people.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And for those, I do apologize if there was any sort of technical difficulties. We did have some in the middle there, but definitely thank you guys for tuning in again to another podcast. We do have an amazing week started up. For those who are just coming in late, June 30th is the launch of our TAP platform, where users will be able to play Stunt Runner, the game developed by Hueyo Studios, convert their currencies, in-game virtual currencies, to crypto. And that is an amazing time for us. And we will be putting out a couple more videos surrounding what do we expect, things to outline, kind of how we're going to be slowly rolling this thing out, not to congest any sort of systems, and ensure that each piece of the pie is working correctly, or each piece of the pie tastes really good. So and with that, we'll be providing daily updates, weekly updates, setting off with the launch of one system first, moving down to the middle, and finishing with the third to fill out the full piece. But I thank you guys again, and again, Kurt, thank you very much.
And thank you.
Hugh, kick us off.
Tap into a world that is more than just gaming.
All right, you guys have a great night.
Hit me with the horn, 20.